And I think diversity is too flowery, it's too soft, and I think it doesn't actually get the message across. And I think when institutions start to use terms like diversity, are we in danger perhaps, I don't know, of losing the critical edge of issues around social justice and equality? So actually when I now deliver a lecture to the students in my institution, I will actually not actually talk about diversity. I'll say I'm going to talk to you about white privilege and whiteness theory. So actually when I now deliver a lecture to the students in my institution, I will actually not actually talk about diversity. I'll say I'm going to talk to you about white privilege and whiteness theory.
Khadijah's a lecturer in the School of Education with a particular focus on early years. She leads our Childhood Studies programme, preparing workers to go into early years settings. She also contributes across the school in other ways into teacher education as well.
The unions really encourage, well, I feel encouraged to go in and speak about some of the issues that are really close to my heart, particularly about challenging what's currently existing in the workforce in relation to black and minority ethnic teachers.
I think all trade unions are keen to both raise the equalities agenda across the different challenges, but also to make sure that activists are given platforms to personally progress, but also to contribute to the broader discussion.
And I think it doesn't actually get the message across. And I think when institutions start to use terms like diversity, are we in danger perhaps, I don't know, of losing the critical edge of issues around social justice and equality? So actually when I now deliver a lecture to the students in my institution, I will actually not actually talk about diversity. I'll say I'm going to talk to you about white privilege and whiteness theory. But
also to make sure that activists are given platforms to personally progress, but also to contribute to the broader discussion. We're very aware from Khadijah's work that if you look at teaching as a profession, there's a distinct lack of BME teachers, which obviously the EIS then reflects the teaching population. So to have someone like Khadijah who has brought professional expertise but also lived experience to the discussions we're having really aids the work that the EIS is doing. And I think in the long term it benefits the union, but also it will benefit the profession and see hopefully more teachers from BME backgrounds moving into the classroom.
Eventually I was nominated as Vice Chair for the STUC Black Workers Committee, and obviously through that I attended the Scottish Union Learning Leadership course, and serving on the STUC Committee, Black Workers Committee, has been really essential, and it's been fantastic. So it's opened up many doors. I'm delighted to receive this award, and I suppose in recognition of all the good work that goes on around social justice and equality in workplaces. And I think in moving forward it's really important that we encourage everyone to engage in honest, critical conversations around race, social justice and equality issues.
The episode of the TES Scotland podcast. I'm Henry Hepburn, news editor at TES Scotland, and I'm here with senior reporter Emma Seath.
Hello.
Our guest today is Khadijah Mohammed, a senior lecturer at the University of the West of Scotland, who's credited with making a huge difference to the work of black and minority ethnic educators across Scotland. Minority ethnic people are vastly underrepresented in education, something Khadijah wants to change. A former primary teacher who now works with student teachers, she also wants to change attitude in schools among staff as well as pupils. She's a former vice chair of the Scottish Trade Union Congress Black Workers Committee and co-convenes the anti-racist subcommittee for the EIS union, and is also working towards a PhD. Khadijah wrote recently, "Our schools have become more diverse, and yet we still find that even the most well-intentioned teachers feel unprepared to deal with issues related to race. There's often a complacency or perhaps a nervousness to discuss race for fear of being politically incorrect, or more seriously, there's a reluctance to challenge one's own underlying negative assumptions." Khadijah, welcome to the TES Scotland podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to start off with a $6 million question. Why aren't there more black and minority ethnic teachers in Scotland?
Yes, that's a big question. Gosh, there are a number of ways of looking at it. For me, essentially, I think we need to look at the current existing workforce and the conditions in which they exist. in terms of black teachers. So we know that Rowena Arsha many years ago did a piece of research where they were interviewing young BME pupils from schools in Scotland, and when asked questions like, would you think about teaching as a career, they say, oh no, you've got to be kidding. We see the way other staff members are being treated. So we have to start at that point where when we don't see that diversity in front of us, and it's back to that sort of, it's become a famous phrase that Rowena has kind of coined about, you can't be what you can't see. So children don't aspire to that role. And those who are quite astute and savvy can often sometimes see the way teachers that they do have in their schools who are BME can often be subjected to wee racial undertones. By sometimes fellow colleagues.
How does that manifest itself? Should we tease that out a wee bit more, just to sort of, so that people can kind of, sort of understand, so how do you think, how does that look? What would be some examples, sort of the kinds of things that they would maybe see happening to their teachers where they would sort of even subconsciously sort of think, I'd rather not.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can give you a perfect example of, so this is probably taken from secondary school, so you have language teachers, so if you're taking French, Spanish, Urdu, and so in my own experience, my own personal experience, when I said to my daughter who loves French, Spanish, I said, why don't you consider picking Urdu as a subject? Because it's your mother tongue, and if you're able to learn more about it, that's fantastic, and you'll be able to get a higher out of it. She said, oh no, Mum, I don't think I can select that. I said, why not? She says, well, he's a very nice teacher. He says, but the children don't see him as a real teacher.
Wow.
Ah, that's interesting.
You wanted to unpack that, obviously.
And I says, what do you mean by that? She goes, I don't know, Mum. I don't know whether it's because he speaks a little bit different, and obviously he looks different from other teachers. Okay. And so this kind of conversation continued, and then she stopped, just realising she didn't want to have the conversation. I could feel that my daughter had a little bit of empathy for this particular teacher. And maybe it came from the sort of respect from home, that your teacher you have to respect, but they picked up on those nuances from other youngsters that actually that subject perhaps is not valued. And again, whose language is being valued? French, Spanish, Urdu. Why? Because it's somebody's mother tongue linked to a cultural heritage. So those kinds of undertones can be picked up, but also when, in my research, what we've discovered is many BME teachers talk about where they've raised something in the classroom, a particular issue, or they've challenged a negative stereotype. A colleague might come back and say, so why do you think that? And are you then suggesting that we should be also discussing these things when I should be focusing on what I'm teaching in the curriculum? And so they're almost held to ransom in a sense of answering and being answerable to those questions. In fact, a typical example was one teacher said, she was asked in the staff room by a fellow colleague, what do you think about the Brussels event when we'd had the terrorist attack? And she says, I was really upset and appalled that, why are you asking me? Because I feel just as appalled as you are, as everybody else.
Justice and equality. So actually when I now deliver a lecture to the students in my institution, I will actually not actually talk about diversity. I'll say I'm going to talk to you about white privilege and whiteness theory.
Many different examples that, obviously, hopefully when I publish the thesis, that they'll come to the fore. These are just small examples of how sometimes just the very subtle and very covert acts of discrimination that take place, and many teachers just, I think, have learned to just turn a blind eye to it. Or as I would say, kind of just, they want to fit in. And by fitting in, they are then perhaps making that choice to leave aspects of their identity, be it their linguistic identity, be it their cultural, their religious identity, at the school door.
Which I guess only serves to perpetuate the problems that are there.
Yeah, because one teacher said, well, I'm a maths teacher, Khadija, so I'm coming in, I'm teaching maths. That's all I do.
So sometimes it's just the easiest path is just to
but yet the literature, when we explore the literature about teacher identity, and we look at personal identity and professional identity, and we learn that it's intimately linked. It's like almost leaving a part of your personality at the door before you come in. So it does beg the question: what kinds of teachers fit? You know, what are we doing here?
So that you were sort of basically saying that in answer to this question about why don't we have, you know, sort of more BME teachers in classrooms, and that was you felt that the pupils in the classroom, they perceive that kind of slight outsiderness, or that being kept sort of slightly on the outside of things, or not bringing or the teachers, some of the BME teachers not feeling that they can be entirely themselves, and not thinking that they want to be in a job where they can't be themselves. Is that?
Well, I think the young people are fantastic, and I think that actually just the very presence of having a BME teacher in a classroom can absolutely break down barriers, negative stereotypes that young people might have acquired from the home, from media, billboards, whatever. But actually, from my research, many of the BME teachers I interviewed and chatted around, we talked about what they do in their classroom. And what I've been writing about is actually making this hidden curriculum visible. So, you know, obviously the curriculum, we've got these implicit beliefs and values that sometimes we kind of pass on to young people without realising it. And they're actually questioning the curriculum or raising particular issues around the curriculum. And actually, when you read more into it, there's a buzzword going around decolonising the curriculum. And actually, my argument is that's what many BME teachers are doing in their natural teaching and learning in a classroom, or raising particular issues around the curriculum. And actually, when you read more into it, there's a buzzword going around decolonising the curriculum. And actually, my argument is that's what many BME teachers are doing in their natural teaching and learning in a classroom. So I interviewed a science teacher, so black and minority ethnic science teacher, fantastic character, and he said to me, Khadija, so do you know where the word alkali actually originated from? No, science isn't my strong part. And he says, well, I told the young people that, do you know that it was a Muslim scholar, Al-Khalil? I said, right. And so it's those small inserts or small bits that they make, those reference points that they make, those cultural reference points that they make, that actually go a long way with young people. And he says they'll start to ask more questions. And the same with some algebraic, equations. Where did that come from? And I know that Rowena has mentioned in the past about, music composers and so on. When I ask my students in the lecture theatre, what do you know what this means? Whether it's decolonising the curriculum or whether we call it culturally relevant pedagogy, they're actually unsure. And they will stick to what they know best, and it's probably drawing from their own lived experience. So if they've not been exposed to those kinds of information, they're unlikely to be able to bring that to the fore in their teaching. However, so you have, and this is what I found in the research, there are some BME teachers who will say, no, absolutely, Khadija, when I go into the classroom, I will challenge, I will throw in the odd comment, and I'll see how the young people take to that. But there are some teachers who will say, no, I'm not doing it. About white privilege and whiteness theory. So when I go in, for example, I gave you, I'm teaching maths, I don't want to discuss anything else because I've got a career to think about. And that's another layer of complexity.
I wonder if we could maybe just at this point rewind a few years to your own experience at school. Where did you grow up? How was school for you?
So I grew up in Glasgow, and I attended a school in the south side of Glasgow. It was not diverse at that time. White privilege and whiteness theory. It was not diverse at that time, and now I think you'd think it's about 95% BME young people attend that school.
If you give us an idea of dates, what kind of era are we talking? When
so you're talking about, you're giving my age away here. So I attended primary one probably in about the mid 1970s. Okay. And it was a time when my teachers couldn't say my name, and I write a lot about this because that for me is just the start of it. That's the start of my identity. And when I go to school and my teacher doesn't get my name right, despite the number of times I've tried to correct, just ask. And I say that to my student teachers, don't guess. I actually say to the young people, silly me, could you help me to make sure that I pronounce your name correctly? Because what happens was I stopped correcting. I just accepted that they were going to change my name. So I went from Kadja to Caddy. They chopped off the J and the A.
Oh, they give you the diminutive version.
They could call you. So the argument here is, when parents name their child, there's a lot of thought process that goes into that, doesn't it? The naming of a child. Some of it's linked to your cultural heritage. Some of it's linked to just perhaps maybe some kind of spirituality, or maybe some grandparents' names or something. White privilege and whiteness theory. Something. But actually sometimes parents name their children knowing that they're going to have a challenge associated with that name, and it might be burdensome at times because they're having to then try to fit in as well because somebody can't pronounce it, but because that name represents who they are, and part of that's linked to their culture and their identity.
And
there can be this sense of complacency where, I don't know how to pronounce it, and I'll just do what's easier. So quite often teachers anglicise names, whether there's research that argues that there's some sort of racial undertones there. I would talk to you about white privilege and whiteness theory. Anglicise names, whether I mean, there's research that argues that there's some sort of racial undertones there, that not just being bothered to be able to try and get that pronunciation correct, because it's not really difficult. And so why wasn't that effort made to try and understand? The argument could be, I just find it too difficult and it's a new name, I'm not used to it. But then when it continues and continues, it becomes, well, actually, you're dismissing a strong part of my identity, that you don't really care, that you're not getting my name correct. And what happens then is a child goes through a process, what we argue about, sort of internalised sort of racism, in a very subtle tone, that you learn that you're just going to have to put up with that and not question it. There's a real thirst for knowledge, there's a real thirst and a real interest in the area. I would like to think that we could have more inputs and more conversations around social justice, race equality, and so wherever we get the opportunity, we do raise those critical issues. Now, I think that there's an appetite, which is really positive, but I think what we need to do is we need to support teachers. So new student teachers, if they get that input within their initial teacher training, perfect, it's wonderful to have that conversation. Experienced teachers who perhaps don't feel confident to navigate conversations around race, then I absolutely would recommend that they undergo some race equality training, because it's, as I always say to my own students, it's not about laying the blame at anybody's door, it's not about finger pointing, you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes it could be down to complacency or nervousness. My worry is where there are some teachers in Scotland, and probably in the wider UK, and there's maybe an unwillingness to interrogate, or actually this not seeing nature of, actually I don't think there's a problem. And that's probably more concerning, because then there's not an opportunity to be able to then have those conversations to begin to change somebody's perception. I think as educators, we're in a real unique position, and we're in a unique position to shape the perceptions of our young people.
And we've talked to you about white privilege and whiteness theory. Difficult at first, because they really are digging deep into who they are as a person and how their own identity plays out in their day-to-day interactions with young people. And it's that not seeing nature, I guess. And so when you start to have those conversations with them, I'll say to them, engage in the lecture, engage in the workshops. I've got a reading online for you to look at and have a read. When you come back next week, we'll have some very safe conversations. And they're wonderful, they take it up and they're eager to learn. And it's just, I think we need more of it. But I suppose there's so much to learn. But I fundamentally believe that if we want a curriculum which is all about equality, and it's interesting because I attended a lecture by a Finnish scholar who said that, I was wondering why Scotland called it curriculum for excellence and not curriculum for equity, because it's through equity that we achieve excellence. And that's perceptions of our young people. And so educators have a real power to either replicate the social inequalities that exist, or actually create classrooms where they offer real, powerful, valid, safe spaces to challenge and disrupt the status quo, and be able to offer validity to young people's culture, their identity, and not expect the young people to fit in. I read the work of Chris Gain, fabulous author, and he talks about children playing white. And so BMU children playing white, so this is this notion of fitting in. So many young people won't want to talk about those things, probably for fear of being singled out. But I think there's lovely ways that teachers can incorporate that. We use lots of different types of pedagogy, like hot seating. In fact, another example was a young person, teacher was talking, it was RME, they were looking at celebrations, and the teacher happened to use the language, so we celebrate Christmas to celebrate Jesus' birthday, and they celebrate Ramadan and Eid to celebrate Prophet Muhammad's birthday. And I remember a young person standing up and saying to me later on, "Sure, that was not right, Mrs. Mohammed." And I said, "Oh, that's right, that was actually very wrong." I said, "Well, did you not challenge your teacher?" And the response was, "You try challenging her." and actually, on reflection, if the teacher had just changed or tweaked some of her words there and said, "Christians celebrate Christmas, Muslims celebrate Eid." The teacher had just changed or tweaked some of her words there and said, "Christians celebrate Christmas, Muslims celebrate Eid." Said, "Christians celebrate Christmas, Muslims celebrate Eid." We stop that them and us. It's the small things that can go a long way.
Sensitivity, isn't it?
And it's just that awareness at the very forefront, and being cognizant of the young people that are sitting in front of you, because one curriculum doesn't fit